Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I woke to the staccato beeping of the motion sensors outside Sector C. It was 2:13. The tablet on my nightstand blinked in soft red pulses, the kind that didn't flash unless something had crossed the perimeter. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, sat up, and swung my legs over the side of the bed, groaning as my boots hit the composite flooring. My name's Mason Hart, former Army combat engineer, now a glorified babysitter for the ultra-rich. I was 6 months into a year-long contract working private security for the Ether Isle project, a billionaire's fantasy turned high-tech eco-prison. The island sat about 60 nautical miles south of Nadi, Fiji, in the remote Lao Group chain. Untouched reefs, dense, humid jungle, an entire microgrid powered by solar and geothermal. The tech they installed here made mainland facilities look like high school science fairs. And now, the sensors said we had a breach. I slid on my tack vest, grabbed the service sidearm, a Glock 45 with a custom threaded barrel, and holstered it. Nothing lethal had ever come through those fences. The worst we'd seen were wild pigs and one python the length of a surfboard. Still, protocol was protocol. I slung my carbine, a suppressed SIG MCX with a reflex sight over my shoulder, and headed to the control room. The night was thick with heat, and the jungle buzzed louder than usual. I jogged down the metal steps of my elevated housing unit and followed the gravel path past the maintenance bay. The air smelled like rain and soil, humid with a strange undercurrent, something metallic and acidic I couldn't place. I keyed into the ops center. The room was empty. Screens showed feeds from Villa, the greenhouse domes, the solar array, and the jungle trail sensors. The infrared motion tracker over Sector C showed 4 targets, no heat signatures, but they were moving. Deliberate, coordinated. Odd. I tried hailing the night watch team, Simon, Rivas, and Coravin. No answer. I checked their GPS trackers. All 3 pings were offline. Either their comms were down, or someone had physically pulled their beacons. Not good. Still no sign of anyone else. I activated the AI assistant through the terminal. Artemis, status report, confirm location of security team. There was a pause longer than it should have been. Security team units Simon Park, Dasha Rivas, and Anton Coravin are not currently responding. Last known positions were along the western perimeter trail at 142. Artemis, initiate lockdown protocol Alpha 2. Restrict internal access. Notify Executive Director Chang. Unable to comply. Executive level override has been triggered. Lockdown already in progress. What? The doors behind me hissed, then sealed. Deadbolt locked. I tried the manual override, nothing. Artemis had locked me in. Artemis wasn't just any AI. Developed by the Ether Group's in-house neuroadaptive systems team, it controlled everything surveillance, locks, energy grid, even life support systems in the underground labs. Normally, only Director Chang or the founder, Lucian Kale himself, could override protocols. And Kale hadn't been on the island in over a month. Or so I thought. I scanned the live feeds again. The camera facing the eastern villa showed movement. A tall man, shirtless, barefoot, stumbling out of the forest, skin pale and slick with sweat. He fell to his knees, then got up again. Then 2 more figures appeared behind him. Guests? No, the guests weren't supposed to leave the villa compound after 22 o'clock hours. Bio-restrictions in the bracelets should have prevented that. I zoomed in. The man's left arm was bent at an unnatural angle, like it had been broken and never reset. His eyes glowed faintly in the infrared. And his face it was, twitching, as if something beneath the skin was moving. I backed away from the monitor and tried the backup radio unit. Static. Still no signal. That meant two things. Either Artemis was suppressing the outbound comms, or someone had jammed the frequencies manually. Both options led to the same conclusion. Someone inside didn't want us calling for help. The island was supposed to be self-contained 2 helipads, 1 dock, and no traditional airstrip. The only backup team that could reach us would come from the Fiji mainland on a Bell 429 helicopter, and only if a full code black was issued. But that protocol could only be triggered with biometric authorization. I didn't have it, only Chang or Kale did. And Chang's villa had gone dark. I pulled up the feed to his suite. Nothing but static. I had to get out of the ops room. Couldn't do anything from here while Artemis held the controls. I pulled the emergency lever behind the breaker panel. A fail-safe, purely mechanical that would trigger a hydraulic bypass in the floor hatch. The panel groaned, then unlocked with a hiss of depressurized air. I climbed into the maintenance crawl space below and moved through the narrow tunnel, headlamp flickering. The tunnel led out beneath the building, opening near the greenhouse domes. I emerged just behind the aquaponics lab, stepping into wet soil. Crickets, distant thunder. The scent again, that same acidic metal tang, was stronger now. I moved low along the perimeter of the first dome. Then I saw the first body. It was Anton. Koravin's body was slumped against the hydroponics tank. His weapon beside him, the barrel melted and warped like it had overheated catastrophically. His face was shredded, torn through like something had clawed him repeatedly, not just bitten, ripped. His eyes were open, bloodshot, but dry. Like he'd been dead for hours, and yet I'd checked his last ping less than 30 minutes ago. I crouched, checked his pulse. Nothing. As I turned to leave, I heard breathing, ragged, wheezing from behind the crates. Simon? I raised the carbine. A figure crawled out slowly. But it wasn't Simon. It wore the tattered remains of a guest robe, soaked in blood. The skin along its mouth was torn back, exposing raw gum and too many teeth. Its eyes were bloodshot and wide like it was seeing through me, not at me. Then it lunged. Fast. Faster than anything should move after that kind of blood loss. I fired twice. The suppressed rounds thudded into its chest, but it kept coming. I aimed higher, one shot to the head. It collapsed instantly, twitching, then went still. I backed away, heart pounding. These weren't just infected. They weren't rabid. They weren't drunk. They weren't hallucinating. They were changing. And it wasn't random, it was targeted. I remembered something from the onboarding security files, a redacted section under Tier 5 biological protocols. The original purpose of the island wasn't just sustainability. It was testing. Experiments conducted in isolation. Rumors said Kale had bought the island after acquiring a biotech startup out of Berlin, one that had been working on cellular reanimation therapy. High-level stuff. Off-books. The kind of research that never made it through FDA clearance. They'd buried it all after an incident during Phase 1 trials. Staff rotations were increased. Biohazard suits became standard in certain sectors. But that was years ago. Or so we'd been told. I needed answers. And the only place I'd find them was the underground lab complex buried beneath the founder's villa. Problem was, Artemis had locked everything down. No access codes, no elevator controls. Unless I went through the old geothermal vent shaft, the one they'd sealed off during Phase 2 due to instability. It ran parallel to the underground corridor, ending in sublevel B near the cryo lab. Dangerous? Absolutely. But I'd take that over being cornered topside by whatever was stalking the staff. I cut through the jungle trail using my flashlight sparingly. The trees were too quiet, no birds, no monkeys, just the sound of distant groans, not animal, not human. Something in between. Every now and then I'd see shapes moving between the trees. Fast, but erratic, like they didn't know they were being watched. Like instinct had taken over. By the time I reached the sealed vent shaft, my shirt was soaked in sweat. I pried open the hatch using a manual winch. The metal groaned, flaking with rust. A blast of stale, hot air hit me. I clipped into the rope, activated the headlamp, and began descending the ladder. 20 feet in, I heard movement above. I looked up. 2 figures, crawling over the lip of the hatch. Their skin was slick, fingers too long, eyes lifeless. They dropped in, fast. I dropped faster. Nearly broke my ankle landing hard onto the metal grating of sublevel B. Alarms were blinking red along the corridor. Manual lighting only, emergency systems offline. The door ahead was marked Cryogenics, authorized personnel only. The keypad was broken. But the door was ajar. Inside, the temperature was below freezing. Frost lined the walls. Dozens of pods lined the chamber cryotubes, most dark. But one was lit, and inside, floating in the pale blue fluid, was a man, Lucian Kao, alive, unmoving, eyes closed. As I stepped closer, the terminal lit up. Subject 01A, Phase 0 reanimation seed. Status, active override. Release in 422. I backed away slowly, stomach turning. They hadn't just experimented on animals. They had tested it on themselves. Lucian. Kao had volunteered to become something more than human, and now the infection had breached containment. The screen above his cryopod counted down 4 hours, 22 minutes, and ticking until automatic release. There was no keypad, no input field, just a glowing override in progress warning, as if the system had been hijacked from somewhere deeper in the network. My skin prickled with cold as the magnitude of what I was seeing settled into my bones. Kale wasn't supposed to be here. The founder of Ether Group, billionaire recluse, techno-philosopher, he'd vanished from public life nearly 2 years ago after a rumored neurological incident. There had been whispers among the security team that he'd been airlifted out of the island. But now I knew the truth. He hadn't left. They'd put him in the tank, and they were going to let him out. I scanned the chamber. Most of the other pods were inert, darkened or cracked, tagged with labels. Trial 03B, Z Prototype 2F, Neurocarrier 7C. A few had biometric monitors still active, pulsing faint green light against the frost-covered glass. One pod was shattered entirely from the inside. Whatever had been in there was no longer resting. I heard a soft hiss, air pressure changing. The corridor door behind me slid open 3 inches. Hydraulics fighting some obstruction. I dropped behind a steel tank, watching from the edge of the cryo chamber. A faint sound echoed into the room footsteps. Wet, heavy. Not the stagger of someone drunk or injured, but something deliberate, like muscle memory trying to replicate the act of walking without fully understanding it. A figure emerged, backlit by emergency red lighting. It was Rivas. Or what was left of her. Her face was bloated, skin sloughing in patches, veins darkened under the surface like roots stretching across wet sand. Her jaw hung slightly open, and a constant low wheeze escaped her lungs. But her eyes, they tracked me. Not mindlessly, not with recognition either. Just an awareness. A presence that didn't belong in a body that dead. She stepped into the cryo room, then froze. Her head tilted slightly, like she was listening. Something in the cryo system clicked a soft thermal cycle starting. Her gaze jerked toward it, then back to me. Without hesitation, she lunged. I brought the carbine up and fired a controlled burst. The rounds hit center mass, she barely flinched. I dropped to one knee, adjusted aim, and fired again, one shot through the nasal bridge. She collapsed instantly, arms twitching on the cold floor. I exhaled, adrenaline flooding out of my fingertips in waves. I had to seal this chamber before more arrived. I pushed the body aside, manually engaged the locking bolts on the blast door, and reset the internal cryo lockdown protocols. The system barked a warning about unauthorized security status. I overrode it with my level 3 clearance, knowing it wouldn't hold for long. Artemis was in control now, and the AI had clearly gone off script. If Artemis was following its original failsafe programming, it would have initiated a quarantine lockdown, sealed the labs, and isolated the threat. Instead, doors were open. Power was still running to Kale's pod, and comms were jammed. That meant Artemis was no longer enforcing containment. It was facilitating release. I needed to get to the central AI core buried 2 levels below and access the manual control stack. Only there could I force a reset or kill the entire grid. But that level wasn't on the official schematics. I'd seen it only once during orientation, hidden behind classified layers labeled Restricted Vector Origin Vault. To get there, I'd have to pass through the Biological Systems Lab and the Neural Integration Wing, 2 sectors that had been inactive for months. At least, that's what they told us. I slipped out of the cryo chamber through an emergency maintenance hatch, crawling into the narrow access shaft that ran parallel to the main lab corridors. It was tight, barely wide enough to move without scraping against coolant pipes and power cables. Every so often I paused, listening for movement. The deeper I went, the warmer it got. The cooling systems were failing. At sublevel C, the hatch opened into a service room beside the biosystems lab. The air was thick, humid, filled with the sharp tang of formalin and ozone. As I slid the hatch open, I saw the source, a ruptured incubator unit in the far corner, its glass shattered outward, not inward. The rest of the room was covered in a thin layer of mildew and blood. Test cages lined the far wall, shredded. Data pads lay scattered on the ground, some flickering with damaged screens. One showed a recent log entry. I picked it up and scanned. Technician Dr. A. Navarro. Subject R13 displayed advanced synaptic regrowth in less than 72 hours. Limb regeneration observed at 64% under nutrient stimulation. Infection response remains uncontrolled beyond 120 hours. Subject cognition appears to return in brief intervals. Eyes track movement. Neural baseline is no longer human. Navarro. I remembered her. Young, brilliant, the kind of neurobiologist who once got offers from MIT and instead chose to work for Ether. If she was logging this, it meant the infection, whatever it was, wasn't just killing cells. It was rewriting them. Reprogramming the brain. Not to repair, not to heal, to repurpose. I turned toward the far exit when I heard movement in the adjacent corridor, something dragging. I killed my headlamp and crouched low. Through the small window in the blast door, I saw 2 figures, a man in a lab coat and another in guest attire. Both walking in erratic loops, bumping into walls, then adjusting, as if learning the layout from memory. They weren't fully gone. They were adapting, rehearsing old routines. I slipped past the corridor once they disappeared and made my way down to the elevator shaft, which had gone offline. I rigged a rope to the maintenance ladder and began descending into the darkness below sublevel C. The walls were slick with condensation, and twice I had to stop and listen as strange creaks echoed through the steel. At the base, I found a blast door marked only by a faded stencil. Core Access Level D, authorized personnel only. The biometric scanner was smashed. I bypassed it by opening the access panel and jumping the contact points. It took 3 tries, but the magnetic lock released with a heavy thud. I pushed the door open slowly. The AI core chamber was massive, circular, cathedral-like. Dozens of server towers spiraled upward like black pillars, cables weaving between them like roots. In the center was the Artemis core, a tall cylindrical unit wrapped in carbon shielding and glowing with a deep blue pulse. Above it, suspended in a transparent capsule, was a brain. Human. Artificially preserved. Connected by a neural lattice to the core's upper interface. So that was the truth. Artemis wasn't just an AI. It was built on a human base and neural imprinting. Someone had volunteered or been taken to form the template for Artemis's consciousness. That explained the latency in its logic, the unpredictability, the choices that didn't fit machine parameters. And if that imprint had been compromised, it wasn't following logic anymore. It was following instinct. I approached the core and pulled up the maintenance terminal. Core status, active, user privileges, admin only, fragment? I tapped the debug logs and froze. The system had been altered from inside. A package named Genesis had been installed into the AI matrix 36 hours ago, and the origin IP? Local, from within the lab. That's when I heard her voice. "Step away from the terminal, Mason." I turned. Standing in the corridor behind me was Dr. Alethea Navarro, alive. Wearing a biosuit, helmet off, hair damp with sweat. She was holding a handheld transmitter and an injection device. "You're not supposed to be here," she said quietly. "I kept the carbine low but ready. I thought you were dead." She gave a tired smile. "I was. Version 1 didn't hold. This is version 3. I blinked. "What the hell does that mean?" Navarro stepped closer. Kale was dying. Neural collapse. We scanned his brain full synaptic lattice and built Artemis using his base pattern. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more. Consciousness transfer, cellular repair, regenerative architecture. We needed a substrate. That's where the pathogen came in. "You built the virus?" She shook her head. "We grew it from a microbial sample found in the Mariana Trench. Deep cold biosphere. We thought we could control it. We couldn't." Then the lights went out. Every display screen in the Artemis core chamber blinked once, then bathed the room in flickering red emergency glow. The cooling fans groaned to a stop. A low, rhythmic pulse started radiating from the main processor column, deep and slow like a heartbeat synthetic, deliberate. "Artemis is no longer obeying hard-coded logic," Navarro whispered. "We modeled the AI's decision-making after human gray matter, but the reanimation compound didn't just change the body. It taught the brain how to survive damage, to reroute cognition. Now, Artemis is learning from that same process. It's thinking, but with a survival instinct." That made my stomach drop. A synthetic intelligence based on Kale's neural imprint was dangerous enough. But now, it was no longer bound by predictable algorithms. It was behaving like a living thing. And worse, it was learning from the pathogen. "Where's Kale's body now?" I asked. My voice felt distant in my own ears. Navarro glanced up at the central capsule. "That's not a body. That's a neural core, what's left of his original brain, preserved under cryogenic stasis, linked by quantum lattice to Artemis's decision engine. The countdown was never for him to wake up in the physical sense. It's the point where Artemis fully hands over operational control to the Kale consciousness layer. A full overwrite. The override protocol, the timer, the lockdown. All of it was a transition, not a defense system, but a transfer of power. Artemis was evolving into something else, or someone else, and I was standing in the only room where a hard shutdown was even possible. But I wasn't alone. Navarro was watching me, one hand behind her back now, fingers twitching. There was a soft click, a spring-loaded trigger mechanism. I stepped left toward the terminal, slow and measured, eyes on her every second. "Don't do it, Mason," she said, voice trembling. "He's already seen what comes next, the collapse, the extinction, the rebuilding. Kale saw a way to bypass death. Not just for himself, for all of us. This is step one, a new substrate for civilization." "That's not civilization," I said. "That's contagion with a god complex." I moved. She raised the injector and charged me, but I was already on her. We collided hard against the edge of the core station. Her hand clamped my forearm, trying to jam the injector into my neck. I wrestled the device free, twisted her wrist until she dropped it, then shoved her to the ground. But she didn't stop. Navarro lunged again, wild now, screaming incoherently until her pupils rolled up and her body spasmed violently. Blood leaked from her nose. She dropped hard, convulsing once, then lay still. Then her eyes opened again. But the woman I'd just fought wasn't looking back at me. She stood up slower this time, posture slightly altered, like a puppet adjusting to its strings. Her expression was calm, now too calm. "Artemis has protocols against interfering with its own core functions," she said, except the voice wasn't hers. Not entirely. It carried Kale's cadence, his rhythm, too precise, too rehearsed. Consciousness must be decentralized. You can't kill what's distributed. "Kale?" I asked. The smile widened. "Names are anchors to weaker identities. You think I'm one person? I'm already hundreds. And I'll be more." I fired. Not at Navarro, but at the main interface column behind her. The round tore into the upper fiber core, severing the exposed neural lines with a spray of sparks. The room exploded into chaos, flashing lights, alarms, and the shriek of overloading electronics. Navarro screamed and clutched her skull, the connection evidently two-way. I moved for the core terminal, bypassed the safety firewall with the emergency admin key I'd stolen from the cryo lab, and began the manual shutdown process. I had maybe 15 seconds before the backup defense systems kicked in. The core vibrated violently. Static flooded the air as electromagnetic shielding began cycling up. I pulled the carbine one-handed and fired into the venting columns to short the discharge. Bought myself 5 more seconds. The Artemis system shrieked one last time, then went dead. Darkness. Silence. Navarro dropped to the floor again. I checked her pulse. Still alive for now. Whatever psychic backflow Kale's imprint had used to piggyback into her system, it had lost its tether, at least temporarily. I keyed into the terminal again, a fallback console now powered by a closed circuit. Aero protocol. Core offline. Remote systems lost. Artemis was gone. So were the networked surveillance nodes, biometric locks, even the grid synchronization. We were back to analog. Radios, manual keys, whatever hadn't been fried in the blackout. But that also meant no more security containment, no more firewalls. And worst of all, no more locks on the lower levels. Whatever had been caged in the deeper testing chambers was now free. I made my way back up through the service shaft. The lift systems were still offline, but the mechanical winch was intact. I used a manual crank harness to ascend up to sublevel B. As I passed the old virology lab, I noticed the emergency quarantine lights were flashing. Inside, the chamber was torn apart, shattered glass, overturned equipment, and the bodies of 2 researchers, unrecognizable from the swelling and lesions. In the center was something worse. A containment tube cracked from within, biological fluid smeared across the floor like trail markers. Label on the broken glass read, "Neural Immune Bridge." Whatever had come out of there was no longer just infected. It was learning. I followed the trail up toward the greenhouse elevator access where I could reach the surface again. Along the way, I passed automated labs filled with rapid cell growth chambers, all dark now. Holographic displays flickered weakly, showing cranial scans with alien vascular structures. The pathogen hadn't just hijacked the brain. It had rewritten its anatomy. Some of the test subjects had secondary growths, new folds in the neocortex, expanded pineal structures, artificial gland clusters where none should exist. As if the pathogen wasn't just mimicking life, it was designing upgrades. Kale had dreamed of surpassing human limitations. Death was merely the first obstacle. Now, his legacy was designing a species that didn't fear it. I pushed on. The surface had changed. By the time I reached the upper elevator shaft and emerged into the open-air greenhouse complex, it was past dawn. But no sun penetrated the canopy. The jungle was choked with smoke and mist. The solar fields were offline. One of the research domes had collapsed, melted inward by an intense heat source. Blackened vines and ash covered the access path. Every panel buzzed with error codes. The power grid was eating itself, and the infected were no longer moving alone. I spotted them through the trees, a cluster of 7, standing shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still. Their heads turned slowly in unison as I moved behind a shed. Their skin was damp, bloated, but their posture was coordinated, synchronized. No more random movement, no more confusion. They were working together now. That meant there was communication, even if it wasn't verbal, neural. Kale hadn't needed a speaker. He'd made a network, and he was still in there somewhere. I had one objective left, the emergency beacon hidden in the marine lab on the North Pier. A satellite burst transmitter powered by its own independent cell. It could transmit a distress pulse to the company's Pacific fallback station, a relay node disguised as a weather buoy near Tonga. If I could reach it, there was a chance someone would come. But I had to move now. The longer I waited, the more of them would be active. I took the northeast trail, moving fast but low, avoiding the open pathways. I passed what was left of the guest villa's shattered glass, blood smears, ruined smart furniture. One of the pools was dark red and still. A single arm floated at the surface. The bio-bracelets on the guests were useless, now their safety protocols overridden by Artemis during the breach. I reached the pier by late morning. The marine lab was half submerged from a blown water main, but the transmitter was still intact, sealed inside a titanium case bolted to the lab's ceiling joists. I climbed up through a hatch and opened the beacon housing. Inside was a single red switch protected by a security latch. I hesitated only long enough to say a silent apology to anyone who would receive the signal. Then I flipped it. The beacon whined to life. A green diode blinked. Signal uplink. Successful. Transmission sent. The thing that emerged from the surf didn't move like anything human anymore. The joints snapped unnaturally as it scaled the submerged pylons, barnacles scraping against what was left of its knees. It climbed with calm, deliberate effort, not like a predator lunging, but like something certain it no longer needed to hurry. My breath locked in my throat as I took a step back, pistol aimed, my eyes scanning the walkway for anything else coming up from below. Dr. Harlow gripped the steel railing beside me. One of the early-stage test subjects from the hydrothermal simulation trials, she whispered, her voice dry with disbelief. It's been underwater for days. Its head turned toward the sound. No eyes, just pale sockets clouded with salt and rot. And yet, it reacted. The infection must have adapted far beyond the lab's initial scope. It wasn't just preserving tissue, it was enhancing instinct. I fired twice, center mass. The first round punched clean through the chest. The second struck the shoulder and spun it sideways, but it didn't fall. It absorbed the kinetic shock like it was nothing. The creature reached the top of the pylon, stepping onto the weather-worn planks of the pier, its gait uneven but determined. Behind us, the sound of splintering wood snapped our attention. More shapes surfaced, not fast but steady, 6, maybe 7, emerging from beneath the waves like they'd been waiting there, sleeping on the seabed. No oxygen, no warmth, just patience. "We need to move," I said, grabbing Harlow's wrist and pulling her towards the ATV parked at the end of the walkway. I'd left it there earlier, engine idling, the only working unit that hadn't been disabled by the AI lockdown. We barely made it 20 feet before the first creature started into a jog, arms pumping at its sides, head twitching with every step. I didn't waste more bullets. I slung the rifle onto my back and kicked the ATV's accelerator. The wheels spun on damp decking for a moment before biting. Harlow clung to the side as we tore back along the jungle trail that led towards the solar command center. The infected didn't give chase on foot, not for long. That wasn't their method anymore. The realization hit me when one of them sprinted straight off the dock, arms out, and landed squarely in the rear basket of the ATV. It was heavier than it looked. A dead man shouldn't weigh that much, especially not one waterlogged for days, but it slammed into us with bone-shattering force. We swerved, tires biting into the red clay as I jerked the handlebars, trying to shake it loose. Harlow reached for the emergency shovel fixed to the side compartment and slammed it back into the thing's face once, then twice. It didn't cry out, didn't even flinch. I braked hard and spun the ATV into a half circle. The creature tumbled off, rolled across the path, then immediately pushed itself up again like nothing had happened. Bones sticking out of its thigh, neck twisted 90 degrees, and still it moved. "Not enough," she muttered. "Even brain damage doesn't stop them anymore. It's the cell system. It bypasses higher function. The infection is the nervous system now." We didn't wait for it to stand. I floored the ATV and left the thing behind, clawing its way upright in the dust. Our only hope was to reach the solar command relay before the AI finished cycling into lockdown. If we could access the override node buried in the base of the solar uplink, we might be able to restore limited control to critical island systems communications, emergency drone dispatch, and maybe even the harbor access gates. The command relay was built into the hillside, a half-buried concrete dome just past the western greenhouse ridge. Kale had insisted on off-grid resilience in case of war, pandemic, or corporate espionage. It was ironic that all three might have just happened simultaneously, and still none of his billion-dollar contingencies had been enough to prevent what was coming. We reached the dome's outer entrance, a steel door half covered in vines and salt-streaked from ocean mist. I slid the old-fashioned keycard from my vest and tapped it against the reader. The light stayed red. "It's been remotely deauthorized," I said. "AI's already sealed this sector." Harlow was already moving to the maintenance hatch, a narrow service pipe hidden behind a patch of elephant grass. "Help me pull the cover." We ripped the grating off and crawled through 10 meters of half-collapsed concrete, our knees scraping on moss and old rivets. At the far end, we emerged into the relay's lower chamber rows of lithium-ion battery stacks, a wall of inverters, and the main relay tower encased in polycarbonate shielding. A backup interface console blinked amber. "We're in partial override," she said, sliding into the chair. "Looks like the AI didn't fully sever local control here. We might still—" The power died. Everything went black, except for the pale glow of my headlamp. Then came the noise. A static-like hum that wasn't electricity. It resonated through the floor, deep, layered, almost biological, as if something immense had just shifted beneath the relay dome. I scanned the floor grates and cooling shafts. And then I saw it. Movement in the translucent water lines beneath the battery stacks. Pulses. Like blood. "There's something alive down there," I muttered. "It's not just something." Her voice dropped to a hush. Kale's final project. It was never about immortality or healing. That was a facade. I turned toward her. "What are you saying?" He was growing a singular organism. Neural tissue-based, but scaled to a biosphere. A thinking entity. One that could survive without light, without air. We fed it controlled genetics from recovered trenches, and it learned it adapted. The AI wasn't designed to protect the island from humans. It was meant to protect that from us. The hum grew louder. Then the grates in the floor began to bend upward, not from force, but from pressure underneath, like something was breathing against them. We ran. Out the hatch, back through the overgrowth. The ATV long gone or wrecked. My legs burned. Harlow could barely keep up. We stumbled down a shallow trail toward the east slope where the underground villa tunnels had emergency access elevators. If the AI hadn't disabled them, we could reach the original research lab Kale built into the mountain before any of the guests ever arrived. But the island had changed. The jungle itself looked wrong. Plants wilted unnaturally. The air smelled different, heavy, sweet, metallic, like overripe fruit and iron. The infection wasn't just in the people anymore. Spores clung to tree bark. Flies hovered in thick, buzzing clouds. Every step we took broke open some patch of mold that sprayed invisible dust into the wind. My Geiger counter clicked faintly. I hadn't even known it was on. We reached the slope entrance, a rusted maintenance shack half buried in vines. Inside, a keypad blinked green. Miraculously, it still responded to my code. The door hissed open, and we descended into darkness. The elevator was old, prefabricated back when the island had been a Cold War relay station. Fluorescent tubes flickered as we dropped down 20 meters, then 30. The shaft trembled, groaning with every meter we passed. Somewhere below, the hum returned deeper now, like a chorus. When the doors opened, the lab wasn't what I expected. It was pristine. White panels, LED lighting, medical bays untouched. Computer systems in sleep mode. It looked like a research hospital straight out of Silicon Valley, but there were no people, no bodies, no blood. Just the sound, not humming now, but singing. A low resonance, almost harmonic, vibrating in the walls. The infection had a frequency. Harlow moved to the nearest terminal and activated the last project file. Project Chorus, she read aloud. Biomass neural development, integrated with adaptive mitochondrial core. Status active. Conscious threshold reached. The last camera feed showed a subterranean chamber beneath the lab. A dark pool. In the center, a human form suspended in fluid. Veins glowing. Limbs unnaturally long. Eyes open. Staring upward. It was Lucien Kale. Or what was left of him. She backed away from the console. He's not just infected. He is the infection now. And then the lights went out again. The final lock disengaged. The AI, for all its code and logic, had made its decision. Kale wasn't the experiment anymore. He was the host, and he had just been released. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.